This is the Mint on ZTN Prime, your sneak peek into the world of business, finance, and economics. I'm Eben Mabunda. Let's get started. Coming up on the Mint, Zimbabwe's housing shortage is estimated at between 1.5 and 2 million units, which translates to a national backlog of 5 million citizens, or more than 40% of the total population. The government seeks to deliver 1.2 million housing units by 2030. To find out how this gap can be bridged and financed, we speak to the reappointed Minister of Housing and Social Amenities, Honorable Minister Daniel Garwe. Now, the Mint will be right back. Don't go anywhere. You are watching The Mint on ZTN Prime. We're coming to you from our ZTN studios in Zimbabwe's capital, Harare. I'm Eben Mabunda. Now, in the studio today, we have the Minister of National Housing and Social Amenities, Honorable Minister Daniel Garwe. Hello, Minister, and welcome to The Mint.
Thank you very much. How are you doing?
Can't complain, should only get better. Now, to get the ball rolling, congratulations, of course, on your reappointment into the Ministry of National Housing and Social Amenities.
Thank you once more. Thank you very much.
Fantastic. Now, what were the major milestones in your portfolio over the past 5 years? I'm running with the assumption that the fact that you were reappointed into that portfolio, that's a vote of confidence coming from the Presidium.
And perhaps before we go to your question, let me start by thanking His Excellency for having trust, faith, and confidence in me and my deputy, Honorable Simbane Garwe, by entrusting us with the same ministry to deliver his mandate to ensure that there is housing delivered for Zimbabweans by 2030. We had quite a number of challenges before I get to the issues or the achievements that we had. We also had some challenges in the process. One of the challenges was the availability of funding. The other challenge was the issue of land barons, which I'm sure we're going to be discussing in detail, the issue of informal settlements. But the milestones are also massive. We had quite a number of projects that we embarked on. The construction of flats throughout the country. In Maronde area, we're constructing some blocks of flats. In Zewaraseko, we've got another project going on there. In Senga, Gweru. And we also have some projects with respect to provision of services. In Mpumalanga, in Wange, we had the houses that were being built for victims of floods in Binga. And many other the issue of issuance of title deeds, which we'll discuss later when I'm sure, was another milestone. During the process of ensuring that we provide accommodation for people, we also created 4 million jobs in the housing sector. 4 million jobs that generated a lot of revenue for our people. So these are some of the milestones that I could comfortably talk about.
Right. I will take you up on the subject of title deeds a little bit later. Now, of course, having come through for a second term as the chief of that portfolio, what are you bringing to the table this time around? What are you looking to do differently, should I put it across that way?
The key word in the new mandate, or in the mandate, is delivery. The president spoke so during his inauguration. He spoke again yesterday. He spoke again when he was swearing in ministers, that what we need to focus on is delivery. The mandate is not changing pretty much, because if I take you back a bit, this ministry was created in 2019, November 2019, after the president realized the need to focus on housing delivery, given the housing shortages that are there, given the attendant challenges with respect to the mushrooming of informal settlements, the illegal parceling out of land by land barons, and many other challenges that were being experienced and that we are still experiencing. So the ministry was created with the sole mandate to ensure that we deliver modern and sustainable housing for Zimbabweans by 2030. We are working flat out to ensure that the programs and projects that we started in the first phase of the new dispensation have seen the light of the day. We quite happy that as we stand, the target that we had for NDS 1, the National Development Strategy 1, of delivering 220,000 housing units by the year 2025 have already been achieved, which is a massive milestone on our part. And we are now saying, given this new mandate, given this new opportunity to serve the country, what is it that we need to do differently from what we did in the first 5 years? One of such things is to ensure that the use of new technology comes to light, because the whole world is now focused, is changed, given climate change and many other climate change challenges that we are facing. There is need now to move away from brick and mortar technology to new technologies which ensure that there is a speedy and economic delivery of housing. So the new use of new technologies, yes, use of, or the reminder that we must be aware of the need to preserve the environment in terms of cutting trees, in terms of carbon emissions, and construction, particularly housing, contribute about 40 to 45% of carbon emissions. And we need to move away from that. How do we do it? Ensure that we have new technologies. Our architects, our engineers must now focus on the redesigning of our buildings, ensure that we have designs that are user-friendly in terms of ensuring we do not damage our environment.
Right. Now, there are varying reports on the housing backlog in Zimbabwe. Some estimates place it at 1.5 million, some place it at 2 million housing units that are in deficit in Zimbabwe. Now, the question is, how can this gap be breached?
The issue of backlogs will never be a cut in stone issue, because as we grow old, other people are being born who do not have houses. Zimbabwe is churning out a number of graduates every year from universities. Last week, the president kept about 5,000 young graduates who are getting into the market. They need accommodation. In 2018, the backlog was at 1.5 million. This is how then the National Development Strategy under the housing thematic area was then crafted to say, how do we deal with the 1.5 million? But we then realized that even if we focus on 1.5 million, by the end of the year, maybe the target will have moved to 2 million. So we don't have a clear-cut position in terms of the quantum that needs to be delivered. But what we focused on as government is to say we must have enough accommodation for whoever Zimbabwean is looking for accommodation, be it rented accommodation, be it owned accommodation, be it developed stands for building accommodation. That must be made available. We must create an environment suitable for any Zimbabwean who so wishes to have access to accommodation, to have accommodation. And that is what we have done.
Right. We are halfway into the period for Zimbabwe's economic blueprint, the National Development Strategy 1. And in that particular document, the plan right from the onset was to deliver 220,000 housing units by 2025 through collective efforts from stakeholders and all parties involved in human settlements delivery. Of course, I'm taking this from that economic blueprint. Now, we are midway into that period, 2020 to 2025. How far have we gone as an economy, and what are you doing to accelerate this very initiative?
Government has done pretty well in that regard. By 31st July 2023, we had delivered 300,000 housing units. So we surpassed the target of 220,000 units. Because of that, we said we now need to revise our targets. So we are looking at delivering 1 million units by 2025. And by units, we are referring to the actual house and the developed stand.
Right. Okay, let's talk about closely related to that, of course, would be the National Housing Delivery Program. May you shed more light in terms of what it is and perhaps the access? You mentioned the stands, you mentioned the properties involved. There seems to be what appears to be a divide between the programs vis-a-vis the knowledge of the masses in terms of access to these facilities that the government is bringing to the table.
We have got to, we can segment our market into two. We've got the people that fall under the social housing cluster, and we've got those who can afford to buy or to build houses of their own. People that fall under the social housing cluster are people who are waiting for government and the private sector together to provide, to build houses which can be rented accommodation, which they can rent. Then we've the other segment, which is on the upper echelons of our economy, are people that can walk into a bank, access a loan, and buy a house. But a settlement is defined as a unit where the first line services like water, sewer, roads, electricity, and now Wi-Fi are provided, and the stand is fully developed with the requisite papers in terms of the title deeds. Once that is done, a person then makes a decision whether to build on that stand on his own, or he waits for either private sector to build or government to build and then sell or rent to that person. That's how a settlement is defined. So it consists of a service stand. It can also consist of a service stand plus a constructed house or block of flats.
Right. We take a quick break. When we come back, we look at other issues within the Ministry of National Housing and Social Amenities. The men to be right back. Don't go anywhere. You are watching The Mint on ZTN Prime as we broadcast to you from our ZTN studios in Zimbabwe's capital, Harare. I'm Eben Mabunda. Now, we are in conversation with Zimbabwe's National Housing and Social Amenities Minister, Minister Daniel Garwe, and we are discussing the state of housing in the country. Now, Minister, before the break, you alluded to the subject of title deeds. It has been one of perhaps the contentious issues that we've got in our country with regards to that particular subject. May you speak to how individuals or citizens can get access to their title deeds, and also efforts that the government is making to try and transform the matrix in that regard?
Maybe if I'm, by way of a background, if I take you back to the separate development that we inherited from our erstwhile colonizers, Zimbabwe was also again divided into two segments. The first segment was what we call northern suburbs in Harare, where settlements were properly planned and developed, and estates developed with the requisite papers, the title deeds. Then we had the rest of the country, where people did not have any form of ownership. Our high density suburbs, they were basically being looked at as settlements for workforce, for people that could work for the then white business people. They had either a form of a lease agreement or an agreement of sale, which never came to fruition. And these two papers were being provided by the local authority. In the case of Harare, it was the Harare Municipality or Harare City Council. So the first phase is you have somebody or you've got a family which was living in a house for a period of 50, 60 years, but they are still being looked as renting. And the president has now said, look, these people, for all intents and purposes, have bought the house. They've paid for the house through paying rentals for a period of 50, 60 years. So that's one segment. The other segment is now coming from what we created ourselves as Zimbabwe, the new settlements, where we thought we would come up with what was called parallel development, where the developers would come and provide services whilst the beneficiaries are building houses. But that is not what happened. We ended up with informal settlements, like Caledonia in Goromont South, like Igimboki in Manicaland, where houses have been built few houses for that matter, have been built, but without any form of services. And this land is state land which was entrusted into developers. I think it was in 2023, 2024 thereabout, by the first dispensation, the old dispensation,
right,
where they said, look, because of this backlog or the shortage of accommodation, the only way or one of the ways we can speed up the delivery of housing is to invite developers to the table and say, government has got the land, affordable land, which will sell to you at intrinsic value. Go and provide the services and build houses where possible for the beneficiaries. And government's contribution is by way of affordable land. You do the rest. But unfortunately, people became greedy. The majority of the developers who were identified became greedy in the process. They started selling unserviced land, virgin land, to beneficiaries, who then started building houses. And the services, roads, water, sewer, you name it, were never provided. And we ended up with now informal settlements. In the informal settlement, the beneficiaries are exposed to the so-called developers who have turned themselves into land barons, who can come and say, look, I've changed the price of the land because cost of construction has gone up. So therefore increase, or I will remove you from this tent. So at any given time, people are so exposed to these people. The other issue is, this normally affects children and women. If the father who was the breadwinner passes on, the land baron comes back and say, your husband or your father did not finish paying for this tent. So there is an outstanding amount of X dollars, which you need to pay or we remove you from there.
And of course, Minister, that has been very, very problematic in these form of settlements. Now, the question is, how can these be regularized? You mentioned Caledonia, you mentioned Harare South, Heathcliff North. There are also others, Heathcliff North, Gimboki South, and Mutare, Cowdrey Park in Bulawayo, among others. What then is the agenda to transform that matrix and bring sanity, sanctity, and order to Zimbabwe state?
This is where I'm coming to now.
Right.
Government, through the human settlements policy, which is superintended by us, then said we now need to come up with a lasting solution to this. The president then directed us not only focus on regularization in the absence of a document that ensures security of tenure on the property. And that document is what we are calling a title deed. And that program was launched in April last year in Epworth by His Excellency, where I think in excess of 70 to, I think it was about 200 people were issued with the title deeds by His Excellency as a pilot program. We were then directed on a whole of government approach, and of course ourselves being the authorities on human settlements taking a center stage to ensure that wherever we are regularizing, people are then issued with the title deeds. It's a cluster of ministries that is working on the program. We've got the Minister of Higher and Tertiary Education. Let me start with the Minister of Lands, Agriculture, Fisheries and Rural Development, who are the primary managers of all the land
in the country.
In the country, yes. They then transfer that land to the Minister of Local Government and Public Works, where the authority on urban state land. This is the land that we have now, where we've got these informal settlements. We come in to provide the services to ensure that there are roads, water, sewer, and so on and so forth. The Minister of Higher and Tertiary Education, because of the existence of multiple sales, double sales, and by the so-called developers or land barons, where people have been sold pieces of land in areas set aside for social amenities, schools, clinics, shopping centers. We then said we need to come up with a technology that ensures we can easily identify those that are legitimately settled and those that are illegitimately positioned. So the Minister of Higher and Tertiary Education came up with the geospatial planning program, which identifies by use of drones the people that fall under the physical planning that was done by the Minister of Local Government, and then identify them and say these are the legitimate stand owners. Their houses were legitimately built, so they must then be issued with the title deeds, with the paper. Then there are those that were settled in wetland areas, in areas set aside for social amenities. Government then said, we will now have to identify a suitable area where we go and provide services, then relocate them to those areas, and then set free the areas that were set aside for the provision of social amenities. So the program is going on very well. We've actually categorized it into two phases. The phase one is the one where we've got settlements with everything, roads, water. I'm referring to Mbare, Highfield, Makokova, and Budiriro, for instance. Right. Those ones are properly settled, planned. There are roads, water, and everything. But what is lacking is the actual paper, which is the title deed. Right. So that's one phase running parallel to the next one. The next one, which is more contagious and it needs urgent attention, and we have provided that attention now, are the informal settlements, Epworth, Caledonia, Gimboki, the ones that you have just mentioned. Right. Those are the ones that we are saying, how do we move forward, ensuring that we bring sanity to this? The regularization program, in its fullest, is being implemented there. And we've also invited on board the private sector. Our banking community, led by by CBZ, are coming up with some funding programs to kickstart this initiative. And we want, our target is in 5 years' time, at least every settlement that is in existence right now should be regularized and people with title deeds.
Right. You mentioned the coming in of the private sector in bridging that particular gap. Zimbabwe has what some would call a non-existent mortgage market. Of course, there would be differing opinions where that particular stance is actually concerned. What is your ministry doing to sort of revitalize Zimbabwe's mortgage ownership, mortgage structure, and promote property ownership in the country?
It's true that Zimbabwe has got a mortgage structure that is non-responsive to the housing market. Non-responsive in the sense that this mortgage structure was designed for a specific cluster of our citizenry, the northern suburbs citizenry of that time, and those that were employed by the so-called corporates. Zimbabwe's economy has shifted from that dynamic because of sanctions and many other variables. We have, and also because of development, we have more Zimbabweans as self-employed actors. They do not have the pay slips that you are so used to. Because the old mortgage system required that you are employed by a huge corporate whose HQ is probably in Washington or in London. And that was the definition of employment in that context. But we have since moved on in trying to beat sanctions. We have been so much empowered in Zimbabwe to the extent that every Zimbabwean has got an aside business that he works. Even though he's employed by a bank or by a mining house, he's got something that he is doing, and that something that he's doing gives him more money than the salary that he's waiting for at the end of the day. Unfortunately, our banks haven't moved on in line with that development. They're still sticking to the old mortgage system, which requires that you must be employed by a reputable company, you must bring a pay slip, you must have a recommendation letter from that company that you are a legitimate employee of them. But Zimbabweans have so moved on. I'll give you an example of a cluster that is doing extremely well. the artisanal miners. The young men and women have got access to money after mining, be it gold, lithium, whatever they are mining. They can raise money and pay off a house inside 6 months, contrary to a person who is employed by a so-called blue chip company, who needs 25 years to go through the process of paying for the rent. And also what we then said, and we are still in discussion with the private sector, particularly about banks and building societies, is we now need to respond to our business environment. These young men may not generate a payslip that is acceptable by your requirements, but he has got access to money through the business that he is doing. Why don't you have a simplified or an easy-to-take mortgage system that ensures that this guy can come on a rent-to-own basis or a rent-to-buy basis as a mortgage system? He is renting from you, but at the same time he's paying for the house. You then calculate the most appropriate period of payment. Is it 5 years? Is it 10 years? Is it 15 years? So that when at the end of 15 years, the person is fully paid for the house, you can now transfer the property from your sales or from the seller to the young man or the woman. And this is the discussion or the conversation we have with the banks right now. And I'm happy that they are now beginning to see where government is coming from, and they are seriously looking into changing the existing mortgage structures to what we are proposing.
Now, as we draw towards the close of our program, tell us more about what you're doing in the rural areas to promote housing and also to ensure that the infrastructure that is necessary for the communities and societies there are well catered for.
Now, one of the reasons why we've got overcrowding in urban areas is the rural to urban migration. Rural to urban migration caused by the attraction or the desire to want to live in urban areas where services are provided. And we said, look, one of the ways we can employ to deal with that issue is to cause a reverse movement, have an urban to rural migration. How do we do it? Provide the services that are in urban areas in the rural communities. And we've started doing so in our rural district centers. I'll give an example. In Mutawatawa, His Excellency is started building flats deep in Usumba Maramba Fungu in Mutawatawa. Blocks of flats are being constructed, and the program is going to spread throughout the country. This is part of the rural transformation system. You are aware of the 35,000 boreholes that are being drilled in the rural communities to ensure that there is clean water provided in the people that are in rural communities. The road network is being improved as well, and the main other social amenities that we are working on to ensure that all the services that ordinary people would have wanted to enjoy in urban areas are now found in the rural communities. Even the business landscape in the rural communities has shifted. We are now looking at a specific area with regards to its resources. I come from Murewa. Murewa is in a horticulture area. Mutoko is a horticulture area. A program was initiated in Mutoko by His Excellency, where a tomato processing plant was constructed by investors that were invited by government. We speak right now, the majority of the farmers from that area are no longer coming to Mbare to sell their tomatoes. They are taking them to the tomato processing plant within their reach. So we're saying every area must be developed relative to the resources that it's endowed with. If it's a mineral-rich area, develop it, invite investors that will invest and develop that area using the local resources. That's why the president is saying, Nika inova kwa neve nevayo.
Well, Honorable Minister Daniel Garwe, the Minister for National Housing and Social Amenities. That, of course, was the part one of our conversation with the Minister. The second part will play on Monday, same time, 2 p.m. Central African time, nowhere else but on the Mint. I'm Eben Mabunda, the Money Man. Let them do what they do. And we do what we do. We mean business. Thank you for watching and have a great weekend.
bone-crunching tackles, ankle-breaking sidesteps, explosive speed. It's the Paramount Garments Rugby Africa Men's Sevens. 12 of the best Rugby 7 sides from Africa will descend on Harare Sports Club from the 16th